Hello and welcome to my improvised home studio. Whether you're watching us live or whether you're watching us on YouTube or on Facebook or using any other platform, welcome and thank you very much for joining us. This is the first episode of the series called my Matura Perspectives, in which we'd like to shed some light on how to prepare the students for Matura, be it old or new, just to make sure that the learners are ready, willing and able to meet the challenge when the big day comes. The first episode is devoted to the notion of mediation. There will be 5 episodes in general. We will also talk about speaking, we'll also talk about reading, we'll also talk about use of English and the use of TEDs as a nice platform for developing skills necessary to pass the exam by the learners. We've chosen mediation as the first one. This is the first topic for today, and I've chosen mediation because it's new. I've chosen mediation because we've never had it before in Matura, and there's 99% chance that we will have it, and we have to be ready for it. If you happen to teach at the primary level, and if you had your students taking the final exam at primary school, then you probably know all about it. But if not, then probably you might like to see what it was like with mediation at Egzamin ósmoklasisty. So let's flip the camera and find out.
In Egzamin ósmoklasisty, there was one task, task 10, which used mediation. I called it the magical task 10 because it was pure magic, because we had never had anything like it before. It was mediating the content across languages from English to Polish. The English text was short, as you could see. This is actually taken from the real exam, the one that the students took last May, and the text was One Ma Star Wars trilogy at Dominion Theatre. And on the basis of this text, the students had to complete the text in Polish, the text with 3 gaps, obviously following the content or using the content from the source text. Magical, task 10, because it was really talked about before the exam, because it was kind of controversial that the text was in Polish, the second text was in Polish, because in fact the gaps were also in Polish, and it was not really sure what was being tested. Was it English or was it Polish? But the students did quite well, and the result for this particular task, the evidence is given in the website of Centralna Komisja Egzaminacyjna. The score was 60%, so that was slightly above the average for the whole exam.
So a little bit controversial, but not as hard or difficult as one might suspect. If you happen to have read the CEFR published in 2017, the second edition, then mediation is a big thing there, as you probably know. However, as you can also imagine, the CFR is not good bedtime reading. It's not really easy to follow. And if you want to read about mediation, it may not be as clear as you might imagine it will be. I've prepared some notes because it's very hard for me to remember all those things. But I would like to just mention a few concepts which are related with mediation and which are used in the CFR 2017, which refer to the concept that we're talking about today. The first thing is that mediation is described as one of the 4 operating modes. So we no longer have skills as we used to, but we've got operating modes. Mediation is one of them. We also have interaction, we also have production, and we also have understanding. So it's like a fully fledged skill these days, we can say. But if you go more deeply into it, you will see that it's based on Hegel's philosophy, that it's based on Vygotsky's pedagogy, that it's based on Gramsci's sociocultural theory, that there are notions such as the third space, such as relational mediation, cognitive mediation, linguistic, pedagogic, social, cultural, textual, media, mediation, and so on and so forth. So obviously, if I was a teacher, my first question would be, what's in it for me? And if we could possibly try to define mediation in simpler terms, we might say that mediation is basically turning one text into another text, or processing one text in order to come up with another text. And this first text we'll call the source text, and this is either reading or listening, if we talk from the pedagogic perspective. And then the reading text or the listening text will have to be converted into something productive, and that's either writing or speaking. So we're talking about two texts. We're talking about the source text, and we're talking about the mediated text as well. And that's what we want the students to achieve. We want them to be able to confront themselves with one type of text, which is reading or listening, and then to transform it or to mediate it in order to come up with something productive, either speaking or writing. And that's what we're going to look at in what's follow with examples.
So we'll start with reading comprehension, two reading-based lessons, and we'll use reading as a source text for mediation or for mediation-based activities that will follow. I've got to make an important concession first, that it's necessary to go beyond reading comprehension questions because we want to ensure deep interaction with the text. And the problem with comprehension questions is that the learners know all the tricks and they very rarely interact with the text to the extent we would like them to. So we would like to do something more than that. We'd like to provide such activities or such an environment which would allow them to go beyond comprehension questions in order to interact with the text as deeply as they possibly can. The first text is about hitchhiking, or the first lesson, a reading-based lesson, is about hitchhiking, and the text is about how hitchhiking has changed in the last years. What the lesson contains is some typical components, we could say. So we start with vocabulary building. We want to prepare the learners for it linguistically. We want them to have the language. We want them to improve the language as well. And then we move on to reading comprehension activities. I know I said before that we have to go beyond reading comprehension questions, but it doesn't mean, of course, that we should skip them altogether. The learners have to do them, and we give them the whole battery of reading comprehension questions. But what's important in this lesson, or what's the most interesting parts of this lesson, is the critical thinking activity, which draws learners' attention to evaluating ideas. And in this critical thinking part, the learners are working in groups and they have to discuss the questions, the two questions that follow. What comparison does the author provide from the website Wonderly? Do you think it's a fair comparison? Why? Why not? And the second one, why do you think the author says he got a different perspective to other tourists? Is it true? Do you think his perspective was better? Why? Why not? And these two questions, discussion questions or critical thinking questions, they simply allow the learners to go beyond it, and they necessitate going back to the text, looking for specific information, processing specific information, and creating a new text based on what they've read and what they've understood. So what is happening is that they have the source text, the hitchhiking text, and on the basis of the source hitchhiking text, they're trying to come up with something on their own. They're trying to come up with something which is a new text, which is a spoken text based on the source text. So we've got an example of mediation here, although it's not the typical kind of mediation. It allows them to create something on the basis of what they've understood. So the mediation pattern is quite nicely fulfilled in this one. The second one is a text called Making a Splash, or the second lesson I would like to draw attention to is called Making a Splash. And this text is about two artists. One is a graffiti artist and the other is a manga artist. And this is your text. We're not going to read the text, obviously, but just to give you an idea of how complex or how long the text is. As you could see, the text is gapped, so the learners have to do something with it as part of that comprehension part or as part of interaction with the text. And again, we've got some vocabulary building, which is a typical feature of every vocabulary lesson, that it starts with some kind of preparation, linguistic preparation for the learners. And then we move on to reading comprehension questions as well, as was the case with the hitchhiking text. So we've got a rather typical set of questions, 4 questions, A, B, C, D options for each of the questions. Nothing spectacularly different from what you're used to. But what is really interesting in this one is the last one. What is the best summary of the article? And the learners have to choose the right answer. Not everything you can do can be called art. Young people are successful in new forms of artistic expression. Women gain more popularity as artists than men. New forms of art are a great way of making a fortune. And this particular question, all of these 4 points are mentioned in the text, but obviously only one is correct. So again, the learners have to go back to it. The learners have to show that they got the gist of what they've read. And then based on that, they have to choose the right answer. But we should not treat that as the last activity or as the last question, but we should treat this as the first one, as the kind of preamble to what's going to happen next, as a preamble to the mediation-based activity. If you've chosen A or B or C or D, then I want you to support it. And to support it, then either you have to tell me about it, or you have to find me some fragments of the text that actually support your choice.
So, making a splash, that was our source text. As you may have seen, the preparation stages or the extent to which the learners are able to interact with text is crucial. And we're talking about the interaction at different levels. We're talking about the interaction at the level of meaning or at the level of content. We're talking about the interaction at the level of language, which is as important. And we're talking about the interaction at the level of text structure. So obviously, the next step would be to see how or what can we actually do to make sure that mediation is actually being used with a particular task.
So we've looked at 2 reading-based lessons, hitchhiking and making a splash, each of them with a mediation-based activity, either as a critical thinking task or as a nicely crafted comprehension question that could serve as a springboard for further mediation like practice. In this part, I'm going to look at different other possibilities of using activities which make use of mediation, and I would like to start off with a praising. Praising is old school. I've not seen it used for years, but some of you may remember that it was a big thing back in the day. A praise is a bit like a summary, but it's slightly different. It's taking the essence out of the text. So what the learners have to do is, after they've done the whole battery of comprehension-based activities, they read the text once again and they try to remove or get rid of all the unnecessary or irrelevant information. So they get rid of all the ornaments like adjectives, like adverbials, everything, every bit of the text that does not really correspond to the essence of it. And once they've removed all the unnecessary or irrelevant elements, what is left is the core that they are working on. Once they have this core, they try to rewrite it using the information that is this crucial central information to the text. A similar type of activity, a similar one to a précis, is writing a summary. A summary is different from a précis in that it is not as rigid. So it's not removing the elements, but it's just focusing on what's important or what is the key information in the text. A summary can be written either in English or in Polish, because we know that mediation is done either between the languages, between L1 and L2, and the directionality doesn't matter. It could be from English to Polish or from Polish to English, or it could be done within a language, within an L2, within English. So it doesn't really matter if your students are doing that in English or in Polish. What matters is that they are interacting with the text. The next possibility is to prepare a gapped text, and that could be a follow-up to a précis, or it could be a follow-up to a summary, where once the students have done the text, have written the text, they can decide which elements can be removed, and they might suggest some options A, B, C, or D to prepare an activity for another pair or another group. Another one would be focusing on the headings. So that would focus on the structure of the text, or the interaction that would take place will be paying attention to the structure of what the students have read. So preparing the headings, that would be finding the most important information, again, in English or in Polish. We can ask them to identify the main points and write them down. So what, in the opinion of the students, is the essence of the text, again, in English or in Polish. Or we can get them to identify some interesting facts that they find in the text. Subjective, but it doesn't matter, because again it allows them to interact in the text with the text. Again, done in English or in Polish, or identifying some interesting opinions. Even more subjective than the previous one, but again allowing them to interact with the text to a great extent. You can go further and you can ask them to write a different text type based on the original text, based on the source text. This might be somehow similar to what we saw in the exam, in ósmoklasisty, where the mediated text is a different kind, a different genre than the original one. So we could get the students to do something similar, to get them to write a blog entry, to get them to write an email, or to get them to write an invitation, for example, based on the source text. And again, you could go further, you can get them to use gaps to give multiple choice options, etc. Again, this different text type could be done in English or in Polish. The thing is that we don't know yet what the egzamin maturalny will look like, or what mediation tasks in egzamin maturalny will look like, so we can try different options here. And obviously we're talking about in-class tasks, which could be either done individually, or they could be done together in groups. They could be collaborative. And probably peer assessment might be better here than the assessment done by the teacher. Students working together, then students working with other groups, exchanging their texts, working on that text, but the teacher just monitoring and helping out if or when necessary. So if we take any text from my perspectives, it seems that any of the activities I've mentioned before can be used, no problem. Let's have a look at the whole lesson this time, an experiment in intercultural communication. We see that the lesson starts with some sort of channeling activity. Then we move on to the matching with the headings in 2. Then 3 is reading comprehension questions. 4 is language work. 5 and 6 are critical thinking activities. So looking at the text, there's no problem doing the précis or writing a summary, getting the students obviously to write a précis or write a summary. These can be gapped. the headings are already covered, so there's no point in doing that. But with other texts from my perspectives, you could use, you can get the students to write the headings, no problem. Identifying main points can be done without any problems as well, just like extracting facts and opinions, or rewriting the text using a different genre. And if we look at the teacher's book, that's something interesting because it obviously gives you the exam-related information, also life skills guide, but also in every text you will get the important elements underlined. So that would be the guideline for the teachers that will help them in helping the students, well, for example, writing a précis or writing a summary, or doing all these activities I've mentioned before. Obviously, you've got all the answers to the questions, but I think that is so obvious I shouldn't really mention it. But what's also interesting is that the lessons are timed. So what you do if you have 3 hours a week, what you do if you have five hours a week, or what you do if you have 7 hours a week. If you decide to use any of the activities to practice mediation further, then obviously you've got to think about retiming the lesson. For example, here it says if you've got 3 hours a week, if short of time skip exercise 9, which means that you can think about skipping perhaps something else or setting it as homework if you decide to extend mediation practice for the learners.
So let's now have a look at listening as a source text. And what I've chosen for you would be not listening proper, but listening in the form of a TED talk. So let's flip the camera and have a look at it.
TED Talks need no introduction. A unique feature of my perspectives, authentic listening skills being practiced, solid language work, interesting and very nicely done comprehension activities, and nice follow-up activities for the learners as well. But also a perfect candidate for mediation tasks, especially if you follow the do in class, watch at home approach. The approach means that whatever is suggested in the course book or in the teacher's book, you just do it in class with your learners. And then at home, you set them the task in which you ask them to go to the TED Talks website and watch the appropriate video and also follow the extras. Those of you who use TED Talks as a regular feature know that the website has a lot of different extras, including the possibility of using subtitles with a video that the students are watching, which could be useful and handy. So if you decide to follow their approach, then probably it's a good idea to set more demanding tasks for the learners. For example, you can ask them to write an email to a friend about a TED Talk, or if you're brave enough, you can ask them to write an email to you about a particular TED Talk. You can ask them to write an ad in which they advertise a particular TED Talk. You can ask them to write a blog entry, to write a review, to design a poster with the main points highlighted, or make a short PowerPoint or Prezi presentation which highlights the main ideas of a particular talk. The possibilities are simply endless. So now some concluding remarks before we finish. You might ask yourselves a few questions concerning mediation. For example, is it worth the hype? My answer to that would be yes, because mediation has been sanctioned as a fully fledged language skill, or the operating mode. And you may also think to yourself that you've always been practicing mediation with the learners. And I would say, yes, that's good practice. You can also ask yourself, what about information transfer? Mediation used to be called information transfer, where the learners were supposed to transfer information from one source to the other. And I would say yes, but mediation has been sanctioned, and the first time it will appear on Matura will be 2023. If you were enjoying the talk, if you were enjoying the webinar, then I would like to invite you to the next one, which will be devoted to the skill of speaking, also in the light of Matura. It's called Speaking Volumes. So you're more than welcome to join in. And before we finish, just a few bits of information. I would like to invite you to visit the Facebook group, My Perspectives on Teaching Teens, with plenty of materials that you could use, especially now, online materials to be used with your learners. And if you have any further questions or any further comments, then you're more than welcome to ask somebody at Novaera at National Geographic Learning. This is the email, so just do it if you want to do it. So thank you very much, and I'm hoping to see you soon, virtually, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, hoping to be able to talk to you in person in the near future. Thank you very much indeed. Bye.